My story is very different than the prior two. I think that the take-home messages were all presented with different challenges in life. And when I look at the 15 million people blind in India, in Honduras, where I primarily operate, there are only 8 million people in the entire country. So we have a much smaller problem set. There are 80 ophthalmologists that are, generally speaking, undertrained, undercapitalized, and don't know how to manage their situation well to the benefit of all, with a couple of exceptions like Diego. But we have created a network of clinics around the country, and part of why we've been able to do that is we'll be able to unlock the value of research in Central America to create opportunities for the rest of the world, and in that process give back to the world as well as the people of Honduras. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how that happened as another perspective on problem solving. I actually started a random event. 1997, some optometric friends of mine said, hey, we've been going to Honduras for 20 years. Why don't you come with us? I said, okay, sure. And, you know, it was the hardest week of my life because I thought I was a really good surgeon at that point, and nature and God explained to me that I wasn't. So every day I faced challenges that I'd never seen before, and I didn't have a great feeling about my skill level, and came back the next year a little bit better prepared, and what I had was a great team that supported me through that very challenging learning curve. And I slowly built up experience and equipment, and in the early 2000s really kicked it into high gear, got associated with a number of local ophthalmologists because I realized I couldn't do this myself. If I was going to do it, I had to train them up to a level that I was comfortable with. So at the same time, there was a parallel process in the US. I was doing top-level research in the US, and some of the companies came to me and said, hey, we've got this information that we need. Can you do this for us in Honduras? And I said, sure. So we did the very first human trials with the Symphony IOL in Honduras. The IC8, the mask IOL, we did the first 3 trials of that in Honduras. So we kind of discovered a pathway to create value for the world and for Honduras citizens at the same time. I had a little problem with my initial counterpart, so I had to walk away from that situation. And what it did was it gave me an opportunity to look at all of the available partners that I might have. And as has been described earlier, that sometimes God closes a door and others get opened, and that's what it was in my situation. It was transformative. It was difficult, but it was a good experience for me ultimately. And so I actually transferred the research efforts to a group in El Salvador that is a very sophisticated group, and I could layer on top of them a little bit faster than I could in Honduras, and I restarted in Honduras. And to give you an idea, this was my single OR in Honduras in 1999. The bed was made out of a 2x4 and a sheet of plywood, and the excess was used to make the stool. The scope I had never seen before. I hope I never see it again. It had lacuna in the optics. There were large spots where you had to move it by hand so that you could see spaces. So I was like, okay, that needs to change. So 5 years later, we're running 4 beds, 2 scopes, 2 teams in our charity clinic. And a few years after that, we're doing international training in El Salvador for various technologies and research. We've now done in El Salvador, I think, 8 first-in-mans that we're developing technology that you'll get in about 3 to 5 years. But what we can do is we can do it much faster there. And so that has intrinsic value to the companies. Just for those of you who aren't in research, a typical startup company in the US that's a device company burns capital, meaning the capital goes away. There's nothing left at a rate of $1 million to $2 million per month. So you can imagine if you can take 6 months off the development cycle, that's anywhere between $6 and $12 million. So you are a very valuable entity if you can do that. Abbott told us that we, through our work in Honduras, brought Symphony to the worldwide markets, not the US market, but the worldwide markets 20 months faster than they could have done anywhere else. During that 20 months, they sold $280 million worth of product. So we established a relationship with a lot of companies because of that. It's like, holy cow. Zeiss and Abbott were neck and neck in that race to create an EDOF, and the work in Honduras accelerated Abbott way, way ahead of Zeiss. And that pattern has been repeated a couple times. And I'm mentioning this because it's not anything unique to Honduras. This can be done elsewhere. And it ultimately provides a tremendous amount of capital and expertise to do other things. So just to add some pictures to it, here is the clinic in Honduras where we did all of the study work. Not much to look at. A little close up, they had advertisements for cold phaco. The OR, the very first symphony in the world that went in Honduras in 2012. And what was great was we were able to metric our outcomes against 3 top German sites. And we showed that we could do as well as the German sites could do. Now, the downside of that was I had to loan my top research technician to this site for 6 weeks that year. So that was tough. But she was adventurous, and she went down there, and she was doing 2 exams a day. In the morning, it would take her 3.5 hours to do one of the post-ops. In the afternoon, she would do another post-op for 3.5 hours. And the next day, she would repeat. So that's what some of the research post-ops look like. They're just brutal. And we just couldn't find anybody in Central America that could do it. So we now have a relationship with ACOS. They provide a lot of support, background support for us. And that's been very helpful. We have a relationship with something called CAMO, Central American Medical Outreach. They're our logistics team, and they do a phenomenal job and have for 20 plus years in Central America. The point of that is that if you're going to try to do something like this, whether it's in India or Central America or wherever that might be, you need partners, you need friends, you need help, because it's an unbelievable amount of work, as you well know. So what does it take to innovate? You got to have integrity. You know, it's okay to say no. It's okay we say we can't do it, but you don't want to say we can do it and then don't do it. That's hard. You got a lot of long exams. One of the things that I like about it that I didn't realize at first was in order to get up to the point that you can fund charity through research, you have to become the best that you can be, and that has to be really good, because clinical research now is a worldwide market. You can go to New Zealand, you can go to Australia, you can go to Singapore, you can go to Dominican Republic, you can go to all kinds of places. So pretty good doesn't cut it. What it does is it gives you a carrot for your local partner to say, if you get this good, here's what happens. And that's a huge carrot. So all of the little things that you normally would bicker about, that goes away. It's like, well, if we don't do this, we can't reach our goal. And so that's a very helpful part of the process. So it takes lots of time. There is a ton of paperwork. We actually have dedicated rooms now in our clinic to house the paperwork. A big part of it is pride and accomplishment. The reason I met my Salvadorian team was I was out lecturing on the symphony. Salvador got the symphony in January of 2014. And so after I gave them a lecture on symphony, and they said, great, we're going to get started, but you should never go back to Honduras. I said, what are you talking about? I said, we want to do what you're doing there, because we want to promote El Salvador and what we can do in El Salvador. And I really appreciated that. I was like, wow, okay, that's pride of place. And so they have done that. And then the country of El Salvador supports what we do because we're helping their people and we're providing a different perspective on Central American doctors throughout the world. So all of those things are potentially beneficial, but it also gives you a new standard. Previous standards of pretty good in a developing country don't work. You have to be good enough to be a clinic anywhere in the world and be one of the top clinics anywhere in the world. That's a tough standard to develop in Central America or India or elsewhere. And so you got to work hard at it, and you got to have the local team involved. So what's really cool is we get to do now charity care with hundreds of patients, but it's paid for by the sponsor, and it lets us do other cases that are not directly paid for by the sponsor. The way we do it to minimize ethical issues is we do it village by village based on the local priest. El Salvador is a Catholic country, and we went out about an hour to 2 hour drive from the main city, and we talked to the priest and said, we're going to take care of everybody in your town that you think needs cataract surgery, no questions asked. Some of them will offer a special study, some of them will just do their surgery. At the end of the day, everybody will be happy. And you get to do post-ops every Sunday. So imagine now, all of a sudden, I have the priest and God doing a post-op every 7 days. How you doing? That's a tough standard to live up to. So we are now on our 7th village that we've eradicated cataract blindness. Sometimes we get surprised, with a count finger cataract. Sometimes you get surprised with a macular problem behind it. We can't be perfect, but we make them better in every case. Our therapeutic index is enormous. As you know, when you start with count fingers or light perception cataract, it's hard to make them worse. Because we don't choose the patients and we take care of every patient, we are not so conflicted because of the financial issue or the ethical issues of taking care of the patients. And to give you an idea how profound it is, one of the companies that's here today is Minosis, and I'm Chief Medical Officer now for Minosis. We did their OUS trials in El Salvador at this clinic. And at the end of that, it was our first village, the villagers went to the priest and said, we're going to hold a mass this Sunday for Minosis, because we've never heard of this happening. All of a sudden, everybody in town can see. And we know that Minosis arranged that. So they had a mass for Minosis to say thank you to God for what they'd been given. And there's other things like that in progress. And so it's a very rewarding process that everyone benefits. So the value to the local government, our very first study, they charged us $1.67 to approve it. Kind of silly, we kept the receipt. They now charge us $2,400 per study and rising fast, because they've realized that if we are willing to pay, they have another revenue source, and we're actually okay with that. As we've told them and said, as long as you approve us in a timely fashion, the money is not as important. Getting back to that $1 million or $2 million a month. The tax revenues go up. We bring more income into the country, and that's helpful. But just as important, we now do nationwide training programs for the local docs. And we do smaller training programs for the local docs, and we provide equipment for local docs. So as part of this, I brought 15 different ORs into Honduras. You can imagine in a country of 80 ophthalmologists, 15 ORs makes a difference. And sometimes, friends get in trouble. So we will loan out pieces of capital equipment to people that need it. We will give it to other people that are using it well. And we continue to recycle as we are able to, and so we constantly upgrade the equipment. So we've now brought into the national training program the opportunity for the residents to learn phaco as a resident. In Honduras, that didn't exist before. In the last 2 years, we brought them 8 phaco machines and 4 scopes and about 10 sets of anterior segment instruments. And we come in with a U.S. team of very good cataract surgeons about every 3 months and help them cycle through both with the faculty and the residents. so that we can make the next generation more capable. So, you know, the biggest issues are streamlining the regulations, decreasing approval time, and improving transparency. El Salvador has done that really well. The alternative is Mexico. Used to be the U.S. surgeons would go to Mexico. The Mexican government made it such a nightmare to get approval for studies there, we don't like to go to Mexico anymore. And that's given an opportunity for Central America. As a result of that, we're having conversations with the regulators up to the Minister of Health of some of the countries to help them understand that if you go through the pattern of Mexico, this will go away. That we'll keep coming to provide charity care, but this higher level of care that you get, your patients get, at no charge to the country, will go away. And so we're trying to help them understand mistakes that have been made before. So here's some examples of some of these projects that you probably don't know about. Honduras was the first site for the J&J Symphony. What was hilarious for me is for 2 years, the only country in the world that had symphony actually implanted was rural patients from Honduras. The AcuFocus IC8, also Honduras and El Salvador. Minosa Zepto was El Salvador. MyLoop was Panama. So Central America has provided a rich ground for innovation for the world. And part of what we need to do as a profession is we need to make sure that there's value remaining in the country. So, you know, you don't want it to be the old colonial story that we go in, we take all the gold, and we bring the gold home. So you want to create the process so that some of the wealth that's created remains. And that's what we're negotiating with the companies now. And it's working pretty well. We could do better, and we will do better, but this is another way to help charity patients and fund the process, as well as create an upward spiral for the local skill level. Thank you.